All right. Well, welcome back to my channel, Olympus Mons, a music review channel. My name is Clinton, and today I'm bringing another edition of ranking the albums. Now, when I started this channel, I wanted to originally focus on Christian bands because that's not really a niche that's focused on here on YouTube. Of course, there's a lot of rock fans, a lot of metal fans, a lot of just general music lovers. So I wanted to focus more specifically on Christian bands, and so I'll get to more of that as the channel goes on. Of course, this is not something I do for a day job. I don't have a Patreon set up, and I don't make money doing this. So this is just a kind of once in a while thing. When I have the time, I'll sit down and record an album. And of course, if people stop by and watch the videos, then I would love for them to comment down below and continue the conversation because I love talking about music, and I know there are a lot of people out there who love talking about music too. So by all means, if you disagree with some of my selections, feel free to let me know. We can discuss it. Or if you have a list of your own uh, favorite albums by this band, then again, by all means, let me know in the comments section. Now, I wanted to do Kansas because I actually recently saw them for the first time a few months ago. And I'd always wanted to see them. I had a chance to see them when they did their Leftoverture anniversary tour a few years ago. But unfortunately, when they were coming nearby, I was out of town. So I finally was able to see them this year for their Point of No Return anniversary album, which was great. I mean, Kansas is a first-rate band, and as a keyboardist myself who plays in classic rock tribute bands and even a band that does original music, I really focused in on their keyboard player to really see how the top of the line pros play their instruments. So it's really an eye-opening experience, not only just because Kansas is just a first-rate band, phenomenal band, my favorite band since high school, but also just getting to see how the pros play their instruments is a really great thing. Now, before I get into actually ranking the albums by Kansas, I do want to mention, first of all, that I have kind of a funny experience with Kansas. I had no idea really who Kansas was growing up as a kid. My mom actually raised me on oldies, so I got to experience a lot of rock bands from the 50s and 60s. My dad was into classic rock, but I spent most of my time with my mom because my dad was working, so I got to hear her music. Rock music from the 50s and 60s, Beatles, Rolling Stones, uh, uh, you know, Jackson 5, groups like that. And so didn't really experience rock and roll to the extent until I got into high school, especially since I started getting into more modern styles, especially 90s alternative rock when I got into high school. But I was in marching band in high school, and one of our pep tunes was actually "Carry On, Wayward Son," which I had no idea was by this rock band in Kansas until one day I was in I don't know, it might have been a subway or something, and I heard the song over the loudspeaker, and I was thinking, "Oh, that's really cool. That's that pep band that pep song that we play." So I went out and picked up the album that song appears on, which is of course Leftoverture, and really, really fell in love with the band, fell in love with their songwriting, because as a classically trained musician, considering the fact that they're a progressive rock band and they incorporate a lot of classical elements into their songwriting, that really appealed to me in a rock and roll band. So while I was listening to modern alternative bands like Matchbox 20, Collective Soul, Third Eye Blind, Presidents of the United States of America, groups like that, I started listening to Kansas, and that was sort of my gateway drug into classic rock and progressive rock. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. So Kansas kind of went through some stages, and they actually went through a time as a Christian band. They started as a progressive rock band in the early '70s. Kerry Livgren was the lead songwriter, and he played guitar for the band. And then, of course, he had Steve Walsh, who was the lead vocalist. He played keyboards, and he was the other primary songwriter. In fact, for a time, they kind of had this thing where Livgren would write half the songs and Walsh would write half the songs, and once in a while they'd collaborate too. But they essentially started in the '70s as a progressive rock band. Then Kerry Livgren actually got saved near the end of the decade. He found Jesus, and his lyrics in Kansas had always kind of expressed a spiritual seeking, but he eventually found the answers he was looking for in finding Jesus, and he led their original bass player, a guy named Dave Hope, to Jesus as well. And so by the time their album Audio Visions came around, which was their fifth or sixth album, I think. It was the one right after Monolith. His lyrics really started going in a much more Christian direction, which is something that Steve Walsh didn't appreciate. And so he ended up leaving the band. And so Kansas needed a new lead vocalist, and they eventually settled on John Elefante. And Elefante took over for Steve Walsh for a couple of albums. Their two of their albums in the early 80s and the tours that went along with them. And eventually, Livgren decided that he didn't want to use Kansas as a vehicle for his Christian faith. So Livgren ended up leaving the band, essentially leaving Elefante in charge of it. And Elefante did not want to continue Kansas without Livgren. So they recorded one last song for a kind of a best of retrospective album, and then the band disbanded. A few years later, Steve Walsh decided to get the band back together and brought some new musicians, as well as the two original members, Rich Williams on guitar and Phil Ehart on drums, who, by the way, I believe is one of the most underrated drummers in rock and roll music. But got those two guys and got a few new guys, and they kind of left the progressive rock element behind and became more of like a power rock band. Which, the first album they recorded when they got back together was aptly titled Power. And it just kind of went from there. And now the modern Kansas, of course, most of the band is gone. Robbie Steinhardt, unfortunately, passed away last year. In fact, he passed away on my birthday, which is kind of a lousy birthday present. But so he passed away. But he had not been playing violin with the band for some time. And Steve Walsh, of course, stopped singing for the band around 2012, 2013, and they got a new vocalist. And now it's basically a brand new lineup, with the exception of the two original members, Rich Williams, still rocking that guitar, and Phil Ehart on drums. So, and they've recorded a couple albums as that lineup as well. So that's just kind of a brief rundown of the various eras of Kansas. You had the prog rock era in the 70s. Then you had their Christian era for a few years in the early 80s. Then you had their power rock era in the late 80s and through the 90s. And then they kind of got back to their progressive roots in 2000 for their Somewhere to Elsewhere album, and continued that even through the two albums they recorded with the new lineup. So ranking the albums, this is just going to be their studio albums. Their 16 studio albums they've recorded so far. So, none of the best of albums, none of the live albums. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get the ball rolling. So coming in at number 16, I ranked Always Never the Same. Now, it's a fine album. In fact, as a classically trained musician, like I mentioned, I always appreciate when bands bring in orchestras to accompany them in their live albums. So some of my favorite live albums are albums with an orchestra accompanying the band. But the problem with Always Never the Same is it's primarily an album of re-records. And they're the only band that I know that has done this, that they did a live album with the London Symphony Orchestra, but they also just recorded an album with the London Symphony Orchestra of the songs they were going to perform with them live. So you get re-records of some of the more popular ones, Dust in the Wind, Song for America, Miracles Out of Nowhere, and they recorded Carry On Wayward Son in case the album became popular enough to do a follow-up, which unfortunately it didn't. So their recording of Carry On Wayward Son with the London Symphony Orchestra, unfortunately to this day, remains unreleased. And they had a cover of Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, which is a great cover, a really, really excellent cover. But then they have a few new songs in here, and their new songs just are not very strong songs. They're not, they're not, definitely not up to Kansas's par when it comes to writing. So because it's primarily an album of re-records with a few sort of weak new songs, plus an excellent cover of Eleanor Rigby, I really went ahead and just rated this as my least favorite of Kansas's albums. But just like with Weird Al Yankovic, I don't believe Kansas has ever recorded a bad album. So even the ones that I think are weaker albums are still very listenable. And when I go on long road trips, I'll still bring most or all of my Kansas catalog just in case I get in the mood to listen to some of their lesser known albums. Number 15, I went ahead and ranked Monolith here. Monolith, of course, one of their last albums from the 70s prog era. It's just one of the weaker albums as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the albums I go to the least. Now, when I saw them live a few months ago, or a couple months ago, actually, I think, or it might have just been last month, they actually opened up with People of the Southwind. They did an acoustic set to start with, and People of the Southwind was their opener. And their keyboard player, Zach Risby, I think is the guy's name, did a really, really great solo during that song. It's really, really cool. But some of these songs are just kind of not as memorable, especially as the numerous songs they recorded prior to Monolith. But you have songs like "On the Other Side," which is a fine song. I like "On the Other Side." I can still remember it to this day. But then you have songs like "How My Soul Cries Out for You," which is just kind of a straight ahead rocker. And I think of course, Kansas is known for their long songs, but "How My Soul Cries Out for You," I think might have been just a little bit too long, just as it's kind of a straight ahead rocker. Of course, you have "A Glimpse of Home," "Stay Out of Trouble." So some of their weaker songs in this album, and it's just one that I don't go to as often. So that's why I kind of ranked it just above "Always Never the Same." Number 14, we have "In the Spirit of Things." Now, I remember reading an interview with Steve Walsh. I don't remember what album it was after, if it was just after the recording of "In the Spirit of Things," or if it was later in the 90s or 2000s, where Steve Walsh actually mentioned that "In the Spirit of Things" was his favorite Kansas album, which might have just been because it was the newest, and he got tired of performing all the old classics. But this is, again, a good album. It's got they do "One Big Sky," which I believe is a cover. I'm not 100% sure who did the original, but their opener, "Ghosts," kind of a haunting, piano-led track, just kind of real slow. Really, really good song, a really haunting song, which, according to the liner notes, was about a flood that that hit Neosho Falls in Kansas in 1951. And so the song is just kind of an epitaph about that small little town that was devastated by this flood. Then, of course, you have "Inside of Me," "One Man, One Heart." You have "The Preacher," which they still perform live occasionally. In fact, it is on their live album "Device Voice Strum." Their instrumental "T.O. Witcher." So again, not their strongest output, but I do tend to think of this one a lot more than I think of Monolith, because even though this is low on the list, I can still remember a lot of the songs, just as if I just listened to the album yesterday. So the songs are memorable, but just not as strong as many of their others. Number 13, I have "Power," which was, of course, the album they recorded when they got back together. And so this was actually the first album that featured Billy Greer, who was their bass player. Took over for Dave Hope, and he's still with the band to this day. He's with the new lineup of Kansas, and he's been with the band pretty much throughout the late 80s and 90s. So yeah, this one, of course, you have "Musicato," which is a really well-known Kansas instrumental track. "Silhouettes in Disguise" is a really good opener. "Tomb 19." I really love that song, "Tomb 19." Very, very catchy. And about subject material you don't really hear much about from rock and roll bands, or at least that I've heard, about a tomb that's supposedly cursed. And so yeah, but then their closer, "Can't Cry Anymore," kind of a weaker song. From what I understand, they had this this, I don't know if it was a deal or whatever, with another band in which they kind of collaborated on each other's closing songs in their albums. And "Can't Cry Anymore" is just, I just don't really care much for that song. But some really good straight ahead rockers on here, like "Tomb 19," "Secret Service," "Power," "Silhouettes in Disguise." So this was part of their power rock era. And so, so while it's still a good album, it's still very listenable. I still go back to it once in a while, especially for the song I mentioned. Again, I really much prefer their progressive output than their power rock output, and that's where I think Kansas really shines. Number 12, we have "Freaks of Nature." So this one has a really, really strong opener with "I Can Fly," where you have this just the driving guitar, and then the violin, just really, really cool violin line that keeps up the energy throughout most of the song. And then there's that breakdown where they kind of stop, everything kind of gets a little more mysterious, and then you have a kind of a little violin solo, and then it's just like a really, really grungy, nasty in a good way, kind of kind of powerful close to the song. Really, really cool song. Really great opener to this one, which is why I placed it above their other power rock albums. Oh, and Black Fathom 4, one of my all-time favorite Kansas songs. Again, straight ahead rocker. I'm not even quite sure what it means. I know Kerry Livgren had a habit of actually making up words when he titled his songs, In Commudro, or uh, Belexis. Kerry Livgren would make up words, but I'm not entirely sure what Black Fathom 4 actually means in the context of the song. But it's a really really great, just a really great rocker. And then you have Kerry Livgren actually wrote one song for this album. He wrote "Cold Gray Morning," and then of course you have the more melodic, slower, peaceful and warm as the closer. Uh, so yeah, "Desperate Times," "Hope Once Again," still really good songs from Kansas. But again, not my favorite amongst their output, because I prefer their progressive stuff. But on the strength of songs like "I Can Fly," Black Fathom 4, "Desperate Times," I really rate this above their other power rock output. Okay. Now these next two I kind of put together because they're from the same era, and because they have a different songwriter now in John Elefante. They both kind of have the same sonic feel to them. So I really just placed them together because I think that they're very similar albums, and as such, they would very much just go well together. So number 11, I placed Drastic Measures, which of course was the second album with John Elefante as lead vocalist and keyboard player and primary songwriter. John Elefante and his brother Dino actually wrote most of the songs to this. Livgren wrote the two closing songs, but by the time Elefante and Kansas went in to record, Livgren was already sort of on the way out and wanted to do more solo work instead of using Kansas for his proselytization of his Christian beliefs. So here you have "Fight Fire with Fire" with their opening rock song, "Incident on a Bridge," which is a pretty cool closer. "Everybody's My Friend," kind of a sort of a more lighthearted song about how now that Livgren is all rich and famous, how everybody pretends to know him, and all of his supposed friends now come out of the woodwork. So that's a pretty fun song. "Everybody's My Friend." Oh, I'm sorry. No, Livgren wrote three songs. He also wrote the song "Mainstream," which was kind of his. Um, I can't really say Bob Dylan-esque because it's not really in the Bob Dylan style, but it's sort of a protest song about mainstream rock and roll, and how and how the more power rock form of Kansas wasn't really Livgren's fault, but he was kind of pushed in that direction by his label, and so "Mainstream" is sort of his protest song about that. Great song, but he wrote that to just kind of to protest the new direction he's being forced in. Oh, then you have some very 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 Christian-esque songs like "End of the Age," which is basically a song about the second coming of Christ. So yeah, so very very much Christian-esque song lyrics on this one. Okay, so then number 10 would be "Vinyl Confessions," the first Kerry Livgren fronted album by Kansas. And of course, very iconic opener, "Play the Game Tonight," which is a great song that features Elefante's piano playing and a really cool 16th note runs on the violin by Robbie Steinhardt, who was still with the band at this time. So yeah, and of course, "Play the Game Tonight" was originally written for Kansas. It was written by Danny Flower and Rob Frazier, and it was actually originally about having an affair. And of course, Kerry Livgren, now a Christian, Dave Hope, also now a Christian, and John Elefante, a Christian that they brought in to help with the songwriting and to take over for Steve Walsh. They kind of nixed that idea because they didn't want to do a song now about an affair because of their Christian faith. So they actually reworked the song and made it more about a musical one night stand called "Play the Game Tonight." We'll come out here, we'll rock faces, but are you going to remember everything we did and said and played tomorrow after you wake up? So yeah, "Play the Game Tonight." Right away, the song that follows, "Play the Game Tonight," really really keeping up the energy of the album. "Chasing Shadows," a really really nice ballad uh, on this album, which was actually covered by a Christian group called Nouveau, kind of an obscure Christian group, which was headed by by Paul Allen. That was his band before he went solo, and he covered "Chasing Shadows" on Nouveau's first album, kind of their second album, kind of a more obscure band. Yeah. So then, of course, Borderline play on Crossfire. Some good rockers here. And like I said, Drastic Measures and Vinyl Confessions very much have kind of a similar sonic atmosphere to them, considering that they both had John Elefante now contributing half of the songwriting on this album and most of the songwriting on the next one. So those two I kind of just placed together. But I think Vinyl Confessions kind of ekes out, my more, my bigger appreciation, I guess you could say, than Drastic Measures. Okay, number 9, the Prelude Implicit, which is the first album Kansas recorded with the new lineup, and they've got a new singer here. Their new singer in Ronnie Platt. Ronnie Platt, of course, sounds a lot more like John Elefante than he does Steve Walsh. So the vocals, at least, sounds a lot more Elefante-esque. And when a band gets a new, for the most part, gets a new lineup, but especially when they get a new singer, that can kind of change the sonic output of the band. And so a lot of people kind of get this idea that it's not really the band; it's more like a glorified cover band, But but all the new musicians are excellent. You still have two original members, Phil Ehart and Rich Williams, and you have Billy Greer, who's still with the band. Billy Greer, of course, started in the mid to late '80s with their Power album, and just remained with the band. So you have two founding members and a longtime member with the band. Even though you have a new vocalist now, a new violinist in David Ragsdale, because Robbie Steiner had left the band, and a couple of new guys, Zach Risby and David Mannion, who are both keyboard players. Kansas was not just a glorified cover band, and they proved it in their two new recorded albums. In fact, I read an interview with Phil Ehart, who talks about how he really appreciates the songwriting by the new members, and now how the new members really understand Kansas and get their songwriting. So you can rest assured that the two new albums with this lineup are very much in the same vein as Kansas's classic albums. Now, the Prelude Implicit had to grow on me a little bit, just because it was so new and because of the new lineup, and so it's grown on me since then, but not as much as the newer album, which I'll get to here in a few minutes. The newer album, I really love it. This one, the most memorable thing to me from the Prelude Implicit is probably the song "Rhythm of the Spirit," which has a very noticeable bass line. Which really sticks with you, and that's probably the most memorable thing to me from this album, because again, this one just really had to grow on me for a time. You have songs like "With This Heart," the opener. They include a couple bonus tracks, which are both instrumental: "Home on the Range" and "Oh Shenandoah," a couple of Americana classics, kind of adding their own Kansas spin to those songs. Section 60, which is an instrumental track that they wrote in memory of the soldiers buried in the National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. So yeah, Camouflage, cool song. So yeah, so really good album, but definitely not among my favorites. That one kind of had to marinate with me for a while before I started to really appreciate it. So number 8 is Audio Visions, and this, people really think of Vinyl Confessions and Drastic Measures when they think of Kansas's Christian phase, but it really started with Audio Visions. Now, Audio Visions, is one of my least favorite albums from the '70s and early '80s. Although I placed it high on my list here, because for one thing, it has the iconic song "Hold On," which they still perform live in concert. In fact, they performed it at the live show that I saw last month. But it has a really great opener called "Relentless," which is basically, if you read through the lyrics and listen to the lyrics as it plays, "Relentless" can really be seen as Livgren's spiritual journey to Christianity. It really outlines how a lot of lyrics really talk about how he basically moved from darkness into light. You have lines like, "In a single timeless moment, when the old was cast away, the new was born into a world of simple joy. And my life is still for living, though it's seen through different eyes, and the knowledge of the truth's a burden easy to bear." So yeah, so this is obviously a song about Livgren's own conversion, and then his song "Hold On" was actually written to his wife, who was not a Christian yet at the time, basically encouraging her to consider Jesus and to take the leap into Christianity with Carey himself. So yeah, so "Relentless" and "Hold On," probably the two most recognizable songs. "Relentless" is a really great rocker. It's in an odd key too. So even though they're kind of deviating now from their more prog roots, you can still kind of feel some of the progressive elements in their songs. But "Relentless" definitely does not set the tone for the album. "Relentless" is probably the only really heavy rocker on the album. As soon as "Relentless" finishes, it starts right away with the Walsh penned "Anything for You," just a quick little piano run up, and it's basically a piano-driven song with some rock guitar in the background. But yeah, "Relentless" definitely is not indicative of how the album is going to go. With a couple of exceptions. "Got to Rock On," of course, is a bit of a heavier rocker, but and "Loner," probably next to "Relentless," probably the heaviest song on the album. So in fact. Oh, no, "Loner" is Walsh penned. I was thinking, well, maybe Lifgren wrote the heavier songs and Walsh the softer songs, but no, "Loner" was actually penned by Steve Walsh. So, yeah, so there you go. Yeah. Well, actually, now that I think about it, maybe "Relentless" did the kind of set the tone of the album. Because I'm thinking, yeah, "No One Together" was actually kind of an upbeat rocker too. And then of course you have "Curtain of Iron." So yeah, maybe I was mistaken on that. But anyway, some really good songs on here. This album is really where they kind of were getting away from the progressive elements toward their more power rock elements. And actually, they wouldn't really become a power rock band until Walsh brought the band back together with Elefante and the new Christian direction they're going in. It was more of like just a standard like '80s rock. The Elefante albums really have that '80s rock feel to them. And John Elefante, if you're familiar with his solo career and some of the other bands he did, like he did a band called Mastodon, not to be confused with that other metal band that spells Mastodon correctly. Elefante spelled his Mastedon. And yeah, so Elefante really kind of leaned into his last name as during his career, his band Mastodon, and then of course his record label, which he called Pachyderm. Uh, you know, so yeah, so John Elefante really loves that '80s sound and kind of stuck with it through most of his career as well. And by the way, John Elefante actually has a new album coming out next month, and I definitely plan on picking it up and reviewing it too. So I'm looking forward to that. And sorry if I'm sniffling. I seem to have some residual um, mucus from when I had that cold a couple of weeks ago. All right, so number 7, we have "The Absence of Presence," which is Kansas's most recent album, and a really great outing by the new lineup of the band. So yeah, and again, Philly Hart, Richard Williams still with the band, Billy Greer still with them, and they performed even today. They were at the concert that I attended. David Ragsdale still on violin, Ronnie Platt still on vocals, Zach Risby and newcomer Tom Brislin playing keyboards. So yeah, so "The Absence of Presence" is a really great album. This one I actually enjoyed just right from the very beginning, right from my first listen. So unlike their other album, this one I really started enjoying right from the beginning. So you have like the opener, "The Absence of Presence," which the concept for that was when Phil Ehart was actually walking through an airport and noticed how pretty much everyone were just on their cell phones. Even people who were at the airport together were on their cell phones. So "The Absence of Presence" has this idea of being physically together with people in the same place, but emotionally, mentally being miles away because you're engaged in other things like using your phone, things like that. That's where the concept of the song comes from. Yeah, so you have some really great songs. "Memories Down the Line," "Throwing Mountains," really great rock tunes, and having their their progressive elements to it. And the song "The River Sang," their closer, really great song. One of my favorite closers that Kansas has on any of their albums. In fact, uh, it's just really really recognizable. The melody that the vocalist is singing really sticks with you. It's a song that you can continue humming for long after you finish listening to it, just because it's that catchy, that memorable. And so yeah. Oh yeah, lots of great keyboard work from the two keyboardists too. In fact, the song the River sang was actually written by Tom Brislin, not by. Well, actually, yeah, it looks like Tom Brislin does quite a bit of the songwriting actually. So yeah, Ronnie Platt does some of the songwriting. He wrote the lyrics for Circus of Illusion and for Never with Phil Ehart. But yeah, Zach Risby and Tom Brislin wrote most of the music, it looks like. But anyway, really great album. If you like Kansas and you have not listened to this album, go check it out. The Absence of Presence is their most recent album, and I hope they continue recording more music. I will definitely be there listening if they do. So coming at number 6, now we have their self-titled debut, Kansas. Now, of course, being that it's recorded back in the 1970s, the programming and everything on this the recording elements and everything are kind of not at the modern standards, of course, but they have re-released these albums as remastered albums, and so most of mine, all except for Leftoverture, I think I have remastered, which really helps the experience as well. But yeah, so the very first album, Kansas, has some very, very noticeable songs which they still played late into their career. Journey from Mariabron, a song which I think is in 7/8, if I'm remembering correctly. Uh, Excuse me. You have Belexis, which is a straight ahead rocker, which again they played for their Device Voice Drum live album. Lonely Wind, a song written by Steve Walsh, which is basically a piano driven ballad, and they actually played this at their concert that I was at last month. So yeah, so Kansas, played songs from pretty much all the albums in their history, I believe, their repertoire. But yeah, the opener, Can I Tell You, straight ahead rocker, kind of an unusual song, and then it just repeats the same verse 3 times. So yeah, then you have, of course, Bringing It Back, another just kind of straight ahead rocker, really cool piano work from Steve Walsh. Uh, yeah, and I mentioned the piano a lot because I'm a piano player myself. There's a lot of great guitar work from Rich Williams too, but I'm just not a guitarist, so I don't really feel as qualified to comment on the on the guitar playing unless something really really stands out to me. But yeah, you have songs like Belexis, Journey from Mariabron, which I believe was actually based on a novel, um, which I have not read, of course. But then Apricue. But these are all examples of how Kerry Livgren, occasionally makes up words for his song titles, which is kind of amusing. Okay, number 5, Song for America. Of course, "Song for America," one of the most iconic songs, which I don't think they can ever, get away with not playing that song during a concert. And they actually, when they played it at the concert I attended, they played the whole thing, including that piano breakdown, in the middle somewhere, which they don't often do for the Device Voice Drum album, live album. They, if I remember correctly, they took that part out. So I was really pleased that they did the entire thing of Song for America. So yeah, so "Song for America," obviously very well known song. "Lamplight Symphony," really really great song. Really kind of an unusual song from what I've heard. It's about a man whose wife had long died, and he spends lonely nights thinking about her. And one night she actually appears to him as an apparition, and it's just a really really well written song. Uh, very very mysterious sounding in the music. And then of course Down the Road is a kind of a deeper cut for Kansas, but still one of my favorite songs. And they still occasionally play it live. You can you can find live recordings of Down the Road. In fact, on the remastered album, the one that I have, they actually included a live version of Down the Road. So it's a really really great, just a short rocker from Kansas. And then yeah, so a couple of songs which I am not as crazy about: "The Devil Game" and "In Commudro," "Hymn to the Atman." Those I don't tend to listen to as much, but on the strength of "Song for America" being such an iconic Kansas song, and loving "Down the Road" and "Lamplight Symphony" so much. Oh, and "Lonely Street" is a cool song too. I really rated this album pretty high on the strength of those songs, because this one I definitely return to for at least the first 4 songs, which then of course I'll just let the rest of the album play because why not? Okay, number 4, "Point of No Return." So this one, was their follow-up to Leftoverture, one of their most iconic albums. And this one, of course, has the biggest song that they've ever recorded, Dust in the Wind, which Livgren was actually started to write as sort of an etude, something that guitarists could practice their picking with. And his wife heard it and said, "Ooh, that's great! You should turn that into a song and record it." And they did, and it ended up being the biggest song they ever recorded. So, hooray for attentive wives, right? And Kerry Livgren, having written tons of Christian music right now, with the few albums from Kansas, and then his other Christian band called AD, and his solo output. He's actually gone on record as saying that no song has ever brought as many people to the Lord as Dust in the Wind has. So even though Dust in the Wind was not written as a Christian, that one has actually been used greatly by to bring people to the Lord. So yeah, which just goes to show you when they say that all truth is God's truth and all music is God's music. God can use anything to bring people to knowledge of Him. But then, of course, you have great songs. So, Nobody's Home. It's kind of a weird one. It's actually about a space alien who comes to Earth after the Earthlings have devastated themselves in a nuclear war. That's why Nobody's Home. He comes, and you have the lyrics about how he came to present a message to the people, but he comes and he finds that he's too late. They've already decimated themselves from nuclear war and a nuclear fallout. So Nobody's Home. He's too late to be able to do any good. You have Portrait He Knew, which is actually a lot of people have very varied ideas about who Portrait He Knew was about. But Kerry Livgren has said that Portrait He Knew was actually written about Albert Einstein. So that's the visionary man that he was talking about, that was kind of above everyone else and taught us a new way and things like that. But he did record that album, that song Portrait He Knew, for one of his solo albums, and kind of retooled the lyrics a little bit to be about Jesus Christ. But the Portrait He Knew from Point of No Return, Kansas's album, is actually about Albert Einstein. Then you have a really, really cool kind of dirty rock song called "The Lightning's Hand," which is a cool song, and really cool to see them perform it live too. But yeah, that one is just real heavy hitting. Paradox. Oh, Point of No Return, of course, not as iconic as Carry On Wayward Son or Dust in the Wind, but most people, if they've heard of Kansas, they're going to know Dust in the Wind, Carry On Wayward Son, and to a lesser extent, they might know Point of No Return. Those are the only three Kansas songs I've ever heard played on classic rock stations, even though they have a ton of great songs that should be played on those stations. That's why I like to tell people about Kansas, because they have so many great songs Dust in the Wind, Carry On Wayward Son, Point of No Return, all great songs. Carry On Wayward Son is one of my favorite rock songs of all time. But they have so many great songs, and they have so many, even though I think Carry On Wayward Son is the greatest rock song of all time, they actually have songs I like better than Carry On Wayward Son, which we will get to right now. So album number 3 on my ranking the albums would be Masque. So let me get that in frame here. So yeah, Masque. Now Masque contains one of my all-time favorite Kansas songs in The Pinnacle. The Pinnacle, of course, one of their more progressive songs. It clocks in at somewhere between 9 and 10 minutes long. And it's got this real adventure vibe to it, like this fantasy element to it. In how the song is written, the music that plays behind the lyrics has this real kind of regal kind of fantasy element to it. You might think it's at home in a Legend of Zelda game or something, or maybe as part of the soundtrack to The Lord of the Rings or something. But of course, The Pinnacle is it has these lyrics about how he like faces his demons, about how he conquered demon foes and things like that. And it's just a really, really great song. And it's actually part 2 of a trilogy. The song that plays before that is called Mysteries and Mayhem, which is sort of a straight ahead rocker that leads into The Pinnacle. In fact, at the very end, you hear the opening motif of the pinnacle. A motif, of course, just being a repeated musical phrase. So that starts at the end of Mysteries of Mayhem, where the guitar is just chunking along, and you hear the violin and the organ playing the motif. And it kind of fades out. And then when the pinnacle starts, it starts a bit slower, and you hear that same musical motif being repeated. And it repeats throughout the pinnacle as well. So Mysteries of Mayhem and the Pinnacle were actually kind of written as two companion songs. Or at least that's what it appears. I've never heard anything official by Kansas about these two kind of being companion songs together. But if you throw in Carry On Wayward Son, which opens the next album, Leftoverture, you see that the songs could be actually considered kind of a trilogy. You have Mysteries of Mayhem, which close with the musical motif of the Pinnacle. Then you have the Pinnacle, which plays through, and the closing lines of the Pinnacle. I stood where no man goes, above the din I rose. Life is amusing, though we are losing, drowned in tears of awe. But then when Carry On Wayward Son begins, after the iconic opening chorus, what's the first line? Once I rose above the noise and confusion. And what is a din? It's a loud, confusing, cacophonous noise, essentially. So you have the closing lines of the Pinnacle talking about above the din I rose, and then Carry On Wayward Son starting with, though I rose above the noise, once I rose above the noise and confusion. So kind of picking up where the Pinnacle, the closing song of Masque, left off. So that's a really cool element to it, and something you would miss if you don't try and experience Kansas's deeper cuts. The Pinnacle is just an all-around great song, but Mysteries of Mayhem, the Pinnacle, Carry On Wayward Son kind of exist as a trilogy of sorts. So you have Child of Innocence, really, really great rocker, one that Kansas even played on their Device Voice Drum live album. Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel, one of their most iconic songs, about Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, his wings melted, and he died. And so he kind of compares that to his own life. Then you have a couple. Then you have a couple of really weaker songs on this. You have "It Takes a Woman's Love to Make a Man" and "It's You." And the thing is, Kansas had established themselves as a progressive rock band, a great progressive rock band by this time. But their label really wanted them to write some accessible radio singles that they could use for this album. So while you had, 9 minute and 34 second, The Pinnacle, or All the World, which clocks in at 7 minutes 12 seconds, which is another song I really dig. But they wanted Kansas to write something that was just more accessible for the listener and that they can release to radio. And so they wrote "It Takes a Woman's Love to Make a Man" because of that, which is one of their weaker songs. Because they were really forced to write it by the record label, and it really goes to show that Kansas was really in their element, writing the longer prog songs, and really didn't have the songwriting ability to write hit songs, hit singles, at least until Leftoverture, when they had a hit with Carry On Wayward Son, and then again, of course, with Dust in the Wind. But at this point, they hadn't really established that element of their band yet. So. Yeah, so Masque comes in at number 3. So number 2 for me, Leftoverture. Now, of course, Leftoverture is probably Kansas's most iconic album. It's the one that contains "Carry On Wayward Son," which is the one song. I'm not sure if this one or "Dust in the Wind" is more iconic, but this is one of 2 songs people are going to know by Kansas, and it opens up with "Carry On Wayward Son." Then, of course, it moves on to "The Wall," which is a really, really poetic song, really beautiful lyrics by Livgren about how people try to communicate, but there's often a wall that people build between themselves. It's just a great song, really, really poetic. Google "The Wall" lyrics and just kind of read the lyrics apart from the song and just kind of contemplate them for a while. They're really, I think that's one of Livgren's best songs lyrically when it comes to the lyrics. Then, of course, "Miracles Out of Nowhere," which is a really, really cool song. One of my favorite Kansas songs of all time, aside from "Carry On Wayward Son," "The Pinnacle." "Miracles Out of Nowhere," it's one of their lower songs, which makes it easy to sing along to. But in the middle of it, it really pleases the classical musician in me, because they actually wrote a fugue, which they play in the middle, which they have, they have Steve Walsh playing the organ parts. They have Robbie Steinhardt doing the violin, and then of course Rich Williams joining them on guitar. Just having these repeated musical lines like a fugue does, and then near the end of it, Philly Hart comes in on the drums and gives them a beat. But it's written in a very fast 7/4, and it's just a really cool little breakdown that they do. And of course, Cheyenne Anthem, a song about Native Americans. They've always Kansas has always been kind of socially conscious, where they talk about like Native Americans and the way they were treated by Americans, or the Europeans who came to settle in North America. They've always been environmentally conscious. Songs like "Death of Mother Nature" Suite, which I didn't talk about because, in my opinion, it's one of the weaker songs. But it goes to show that Kansas has always kind of had this. They're not like social justice warrior, you know, kind of songs, but they've definitely always been socially conscious about things like the way the Native Americans have been treated, or like environmental conscious with "Death of Mother Nature" Suite, and even "Song for America" has some of the environmental themes in it about how uh, about like highways scar the mountainsides, and humans have built things which kind of takes away from the natural beauty of America. So yeah, and then of course you have Magnum Opus, which kind of a bold move, naming a piece you wrote Magnum Opus. But yeah, it's an instrumental piece that runs, what, like 10 or 12 minutes, because it has looks like 6 movements in the song, only one of which has lyrics. The rest is instrumental. Then you have, straight ahead rockers like "What's on My Mind," "Questions of My Childhood," just an all around great album by Kansas, and would be number one if it weren't for the fact that I just like this next album all the more. So number one is "Somewhere to Elsewhere," kind of Kerry Livgren's reunion album from the year 2000. Where after Kansas had done their power rock thing, they had their albums "Power," "In the Spirit of Things," "Freaks of Nature," "Always Never the Same." "Somewhere to Elsewhere" kind of got back to their progressive roots. Kerry Livgren came back in to record, and I think to perform as well. You have songs like "Icarus 2," which is not really a follow-up to "Icarus Born on Wings of Steel," but it is a song that they started playing with Icarus Born on Wings of Steel. They play Icarus, and then they would lead right into Icarus 2. Now, they didn't do that at the concert I attended last month. They played Icarus Born on Wings of Steel, but they didn't play Icarus 2 at all. So I guess that's something they've decided not to do any longer. But it's something they did on their Device Voice Drum album, a live album. And I think and I'm not sure if they did it on. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they did it on their Leftoverture Live and Beyond live album or not. But that was something that they started doing as well. Icarus 2, of course, is a song about World War II airplane pilots, and starts with a really really great piano part in 7/4, or no 7/8, I think it is, and uh, for the first half of the song is just kind of like a piano led, sort of a melodic ballad sort of song. But then when he gets to the middle of it, everything kind of stops. You get this real breathy vocal by Robbie Steinhardt, who always provides like the lower vocals in the songs, and then it moves into like a kind of like a dirty rocker kind of thing with crunchy guitars by Rich Williams, and just rocks out for the rest of the song. Really cool song. Yeah, then you have "The Coming Dawn," Thanatopsis, again another made up word by Livgren. I think it's a made up word. At least I'm not familiar with it. But this one has kind of an unusual piano part. It's just a real, just kind of a, real slow kind of plunking piano part. But it's not, it's not played with a triad. It's more like it played in two chords, which gives it kind of an unusual sound to it. Um, so yeah, then you have Myriad, Disappearing Skin Type Blues, When the World Was Young, all great rock songs. Distant Vision, though, not only my favorite song on the album, but one of my favorite Kansas songs of all time. So up there with The Pinnacle, uh, Miracles Out of Nowhere, Carry On Wayward Son would also be Distant Vision. Distant Vision is a very, very progressive song as well, in that it's it's a long song. It's written in you know different time signatures, and it actually it seems to incorporate Livgren's Christian faith in it. It seems to be a song about about evangelism, essentially. At least that's kind of that's kind of the what I get from it when I listen to it, because Livgren talks about in the song how he has this dream about like people lost in an island, and it's up to him to lead them to safety. And so it really sounds like Livgren is writing a song here about evangelism with Distant Vision. So it's not just the lyrics; it's the music and everything that I really love for Distant Vision. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. One of my all-time favorite Kansas songs. Okay, well there you have it. Those are how I would rank the Kansas albums uh, from worst to best. And again, of course, they've never written a bad album, so even worst doesn't mean bad. I can still return to any of these albums and enjoy myself listening to them. So just to kind of recap, number 16 was Always Never the Same. Number 15 was Monolith. Number 14, In the Spirit of Things. Number 13 was Power. Number 12 was Freaks of Nature. Number 11 was Drastic Measures. Number 10, Vinyl Confessions. Number 9, The Prelude Implicit. Number 8, Audio Visions. Number 7, The Absence of Presence. Number 6, Kansas. Number 5, Song for America. Number 4, Point of No Return. Number 3, Masque. Number 2, Leftoverture. And number 1, Somewhere to Elsewhere. Well, I actually just picked up the new album by Tears for Fears, and I'm going to review that here in a few days. I can't wait to get to that one. So yeah, that's kind of what I have coming up next. And again, John Elefante has a new album coming out next month, which I plan on picking up and reviewing. But what did you think of my order? Do you disagree with it? Are there ones you hold in common, or what's your ranking for favorite albums? Let me know in the comments below. So if you've made it this far through the video, thanks for listening, and yeah, I look forward to seeing what you have to say about it. So yeah, with that being said, this has been Clinton for the Olympus Mons Music Review channel, and I'll see you next time.